You know Gray Bar for electrical parts, but there's one more thing you may not be thinking of us for that can help maximize your next project's total value. Our pre-project planning services are designed to help you win the bid, save on labor costs, and keep your installers productive across your entire build. The sooner you call us, the better. Because when we're there from the beginning, we can anticipate your needs and help you solve problems before they become problems. Yep, Gray Bar does that.
Latest edition of the Show Before the Show podcast from MILB.com. I'm trying to be like semi-quiet. I'm in an Airbnb in Seoul, and I share a wall with people. I'm assuming they're like, "What is that? A Skype call ringing at 1:40 in the morning?" What?
You Americans in your podcast, just recording at all hours.
You people in your podcasts, unbelievable. We're gonna do a podcast. It's another week of baseball, and we're talking about things. My name is Tyler Mon, and his name is Sam Dykstra. And Sam, how are you? I feel so out of the loop.
Yeah, no, I think things are good. Things are good. We'll get to it a little bit in three strikes, but the playoffs are winding down, as it were. A lot of leagues have already clinched their champions and all that kind of stuff, and it's so weird thinking next week is the AAA National Championship, and the day after that. So the AAA National Championship is Tuesday. Day after that is the Arizona Fall League opening day. Train keeps it trucking. It is. I mean, it's kind of nice to keep up that momentum, and we've talked about the AFL changes in the past, so I won't reiterate too much of it, but it's just going to be so weird to not have that break anymore. It's just immediately picking up with some of the game's best prospects playing in Arizona right after we thought the playoffs were done.
Yeah, it is going to be a little bit more than crazy. But we are delighted to welcome you into this week's episode of the Show Before the Show. And you can find us wherever you find your podcasts on Apple Podcasts and Google Play and everywhere else. And you can give us a rating and a review and a subscription. And get in touch with the show, podcast at MILB.com. If you would like, we had a fan get in touch, send an email to the old podcast address today, intended for one Benjamin Hill, which was about the Mexican League. One of our fans who got a chance to check out a little Mexican League ball. And if you would like to tell us your stories about gallivanting around the world of minor league baseball, please do be sure to get in touch. And with that, let's kick things off on three strikes for this week's episode of the show. The playoffs are underway across the minor leagues, as Sam noted just a short moment ago. Sam, the postseason to this point, what have you seen? What has stood out?
Yeah, so I know we had our AAA National Championship kind of preview last time out, and that is already not aged well, and I'll fully take the opposite of credit for that. Gwinnett lost 3-1 to AAA Columbus, so Columbus is now in the Governor's Cup Finals. And Las Vegas, my other pick, lost in 5 games to Sacramento. So neither team even made its finals, but I think that just kind of shows anything can happen in a 5-game series.
You can't kill the Durham Bulls.
Yeah, well, that too. Well, that's the funny thing is that right now the Durham Bulls, who beat Scranton Wilkes-Barre in 3 games, they swept that series. They are currently down 2-0 to the Columbus Clippers in the International League.
You just win.
Yeah, they're just one win or one loss away from elimination, but I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not going to say Columbus is going to Memphis. I literally was bitten by this last week. I'm not doing it again. And then over there in the PCL as well, Sacramento is currently leading Round Rock 2-0. So as things stand, by the time you hear this could be different. Durham and Round Rock could easily win Game 3, and things could be a little different. But as things stand right now, it's looking like it's going to be Columbus and Sacramento in AAA. One other playoffs I want to kind of point out that it has been really interesting is the Texas League. We've talked up AA Arkansas a lot this year. They didn't make it to the finals. They actually lost to Tulsa 3-2 in the best-of-5 semis. So right now, it is a 1-1 finals between Tulsa and Amarillo. Amarillo has been a good team for most of the year. They got Mackenzie Gore down the stretch. They got Luis Patino down the stretch. Gore isn't pitching in these playoffs. They've shut him down after he hit his innings limit. But one of the most interesting players on that team now is Taylor Trammell, who came over from the Reds in that kind of mega swap at the deadline. And Taylor Trammell is coming off a rough season. The regular season didn't go his way. It's the first time he's ever played at Double-A. He was at Chattanooga before that. Never had an OPS above 700 at either Double-A spots. But so far in the playoffs, he's looked a lot more like the Taylor Trammell we've expected to see. He's 11 for 29 in the playoffs this year. That's a 379 average through 7 games. He's got 2 homers, 2 triples, and a double. Make that 5 extra base hits in 7 games. 7 RBIs, that's always going to work, and 2 stolen bases. Trammell has shown, especially in the Futures game the last couple of years, that his tool set will play. I mean, he's got a chance to have pretty good power from the left side. People believe in the hit tool. He's just young. He was a high school pick coming out of the draft. He's been pushed fairly aggressively. It's been a challenging season for him, but we're starting to see him make those adjustments and really make the game his own at the right time for the Amarillo Sod Poodles. So that Texas League Finals is definitely going to be something you're going to want to watch, and that's going to go, like we said, for a couple more days because it's 1-1 tied right now. Also on the Tulsa side, 2 guys on that team to watch, Josiah Gray and Jeter Downs, both came from the Reds also, so it's kind of funny. Former Reds prospects have a big piece of this Texas League Finals championship series. Josiah Gray is now a top 100 prospect after the way he's climbed the ladder. He was a shortstop in college, moved to the mound. His stuff is really showing now with the Dodgers in his first full season. They've allowed him to climb 3 levels. I'm not sure. He started game 1, was just okay. I don't know if he'll get a chance to pitch game 5 or not. Should it go to that, but keep an eye out if he does come back around. And Jeter Downs has had a breakout season of his own in his first season in the Los Angeles system. He homered 3 times in Game 3, in a wild Game 3. I think the final score was 18-9, which was absolutely insane. Yeah, 18-9 Tulsa. So there's lots of storylines to follow here in the Texas League. They're going back to Tulsa for Games 3, 4, and 5, Game 5 if necessary. If you get a chance, be sure to watch those. And I think all of them are on TV, so get a chance there. Some of the champions that have been crowned since the last time we talked. Hillsborough won the Northwest League title. That's the 3rd time Hillsborough has won that league championship in the last 6 years, which is kind of crazy. And then in the New York Penn League, the Brooklyn Cyclones won their first championship in the club's history. That's their first outright championship. The last time they won a share was in 2001 when the playoffs were kind of canceled early. So this is that club's first title ever really in the New York Penn League since they moved to Brooklyn. A couple of standouts on that. Brett Beatty, first round pick, got moved up late. He helped in that championship run. Matthew Allan threw 3 perfect innings for Brooklyn in the clincher. That's really promising. 3rd round pick. Wasn't expected to sign after he missed the first round. The Mets come back around and scoop him up and make some other picks that allow them to get the money to sign Matthew Allan. Now he's in the system. Now he's providing results in title-winning games, which is fascinating and really speaks to his potential down the line. We're going to have continued playoff coverage, in the next week. We know there's only 1 week of this left. I think all the leagues are now officially in their finals. But yeah, be sure to tune in or find the links on the site to all of these games. We're covering each series as it goes along every night, and with a reaction from players, managers, all that kind of stuff. And we'll have clinching videos and the fun, Gatorade dumping pictures, all that fun stuff on the site at MILB.com.
Strike 2 this week, a whole bunch of promotions across the minor leagues. Jesus Luzardo has been called up to the Oakland Athletics, a move that we thought we could see maybe last year at some point. Nico Horner has jumped up to the major league level, another one of those guys who I don't think we've talked about maybe quite as much as his body of work to this point would suggest. It's been, I don't want to say a quiet season by any stretch for Nico Horner, but a guy who has made that climb and gets a chance now to test himself for this last month of the Major League regular season by getting that bump up to the big league level with the Chicago Cubs. The Seattle Mariners, who have been out of contention for a little while but are trying to figure out what they've got in their next chapter with a very exciting group of prospects and a really intriguing group of prospects. Justin Dunn, Kyle Lewis, both up at the Major League level. Sam, these call-ups right now in September, give me your reaction to these.
Yeah, one thing I want to kind of just point out real quick that's funny to me is that all 4 of these guys, Justin Dunn, Nico Horner, Jesus Luzardo, and Kyle Lewis have been on the show before. Just a little plug there.
It's the show before the show bump.
Yeah, you can go back in our archives and find our interviews at different points of their career. So some of them, it's talking about adjusting to pro ball, and that doesn't really matter anymore now that we know that they are major leaguers. But just kind of a cool thing to point out. With Luzardo, the A's bring him up. They are obviously in that packed AL wildcard race with the Indians and the Rays. So they need all the help they can get. Luzardo can certainly help right now. He made his debut the other night. Did not look overmatched whatsoever. He only gave up 1 hit and 1 run. They were both on a home run. But he struck out 2, didn't walk any over 3 innings. His first strikeout, if you get a chance, watch that video. He spots a 2-seamer at the low end of the zone that seems to sneak up on the batter. Really impressive stuff. It seems like he's going to have no trouble transitioning to a bullpen role after he was starting the last couple weeks coming off of injury for the AAA Las Vegas Aviators. But adding him to that mix with A.J. Puck, obviously the A's are really going for it this year, trying to make sure that they get one of those 2 wild card spots, give them a chance to get into the postseason. And Luzardo can be a weapon out of that pen with a plus fastball, with a good curveball, with a really good changeup that has been good even back to his high school days when guys don't normally need changeups. And he can throw it in the zone. Hopefully he can be healthy throughout this month. I think putting him in a bullpen role will certainly help that. It limits his innings a little bit, but giving him 3 innings last night was certainly promising. With Nico Horner, like you mentioned, Tyler, he wasn't somebody on our radar really for a September call-up. The Cubs infield, when healthy, is generally really good, and Nico Horner only played at Double-A this year and dealt with his own injury issues and was kind of limited in that way. Unlike some of these other guys we'll mention with Justin Dunn and Kyle Lewis, he's not Rule 5 eligible. He was just taken in the 2018 draft. He's actually the first guy from the 2018 draft to reach the majors. So why bring him up? Well, Addison Russell was going through the concussion protocol. Javier Baez has a hairline fracture in his hand. Really disappointing stuff from an injury standpoint. So the Cubs looked at what they had, and the Cubs are kind of in a skid of their own right now. They're potentially losing out on a wild card spot. Who was the best shortstop they had in the system? They decided that is Nico Horner. Now, what has Horner done to push that? He's got a plus hit tool when healthy. He was dealing with his own hairline fracture of his left wrist this April. Started to come back around this August. He makes a ton of contact, and he showed that already in the majors. He's 4 for 11 to start his career with the triple. Has only struck out once in those 11 at-bats, and I think that's going to continue. He's kind of a contact-first player that usually sucks a little bit of power out of him, and nobody expects him to be a plus power hitter. He only had 3 homers this year in 70 games with Double-A Tennessee. But that type of elite contact-making ability is something that can help him. He thrives on his ability to show good hand-eye coordination. That's going to work. Some questions about whether he's going to stick at shortstop long-term. He's got a pretty good run tool. He can cover ground pretty well there. The arm maybe will force him to move to second. He also has a little bit of experience in the outfield. But for right now, they intend to use him as a shortstop. And it's kind of exciting to have a team look at their depth chart and realize, hey, this prospect we have really is the best option. Let's get him here now. It's pretty refreshing to see that happen. Justin Dunn and Kyle Lewis with the Mariners real quick. Like I said, they are Rule 5 eligible this offseason. The Mariners didn't necessarily have to add them now. They could have waited until the November deadline. But by bringing them up now, they get a look at them. They say, okay, we're trying to map out our future here this offseason. What can these guys do? For Kyle Lewis, it's really exciting to see him get up there. Former first-round pick a couple years back, but has really struggled with knee injuries the last couple of years. He played 122 games this year. That was his first time ever playing more than 100 games in the minors. He was, like I said, the 11th overall pick in 2016. Comes up, first 2 games, already has 2 home runs. Those are his first 2 major league hits, in fact. And one of those homers actually broke up a Sonny Gray no-hitter, which was really neat to see out of him getting legitimately a chance. Now the Mariners are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their outfield. Braden Bishop has come up this year. Jake Fraley has come up this year. Jared Kelenic is banging down the door, as we know, and Julio Rodriguez isn't much further behind him. What can Lewis do? This is a real major league audition for him. To see him go yard in each of his first 2 games is a promising start. We'll see how he can continue it as major league pitchers adjust to him. Justin Dunn is the better prospect of these 2 guys. He was the number 5 prospect in the M system. Lewis is number 10. But he had a stellar season as well this year at AA Arkansas, 3.55 ERA, 158 strikeouts versus only 39 walks and 131 and 2/3 innings. He thrives off kind of a deeper arsenal. He can throw a fastball, slider, curve, or changeup. It's the fastball and slider that are above average pitches, and that's probably what he's going to rely on to start in the majors. I'm not sure if they're going to use him as a starter or as a reliever, maybe just as a reliever to get his feet wet a little bit, but he is a starter long term. What is he going to be able to show to potentially win a rotation spot next spring? We'll see, but it is exciting to see him get this chance and be able to prove himself beyond just what he was doing with the Travelers.
And strike 3 this week, there was a story that caused quite a bit of buzz on minor league Twitter when you wake up to a whole bunch of notifications on the other side of the planet of people saying, oh my God, the minor leagues are doomed. It's very confusing. But 538 had a story from Travis Sawchik under the headline, Are the Minor Leagues Necessary? In which, among other things, he argued, I think, some fairly decent points about maybe perhaps bloated ranks of the minor league system, but also moving toward a European model, the soccer type of model of player development and how player development can be streamlined. Kind of cherry picked a stat that minor league baseball attendance had been down, which was true for, I think, 1 year out of like the last decade, and it's back up this year by more than 1 million fans. But still an interesting story and an interesting concept, and it definitely got people talking, which is part of the reason why you write things, to be thought provoking and all that. But Sam, your reaction to this story, and the firestorm that it caused.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is the headline was actually, do we even need minor league baseball?
Right. That's it.
Just such a weird headline because
and I will say the headline seems to have been written by somebody not necessarily in line with the full frame of the article itself, of the column itself.
Yes, no, that's true. And, not all writers do their headlines, and that's fine. But as Deadspin kind of pointed out, who is we in this situation?
Right.
Because do we even need minor league baseball? Is that fans? Is that players? Is that front offices? How are we framing this debate to begin with? But in terms of the overall premise, they kind of use the Houston Astros as an example. Houston Astros for a long time now have been held up as a player development success story for the way that they have developed, obviously, World Series champions and continual contenders. And in recent years, the Astros have tried to reel in the amount of affiliates they have with the idea of giving a lot of resources to fewer affiliates. And I think there's something to be said for that, for sure. But there's just so many other things involved in this kind of complicated web. And one of the standout quotes to me, which was kind of, I don't know, it was dismissed pretty quickly. It was kind of thrown into the end of a paragraph, was Mitch Haniger. Mitch Haniger, you might remember, was never really a top 100 prospect. Was really good at the end of his minor league career, and then Seattle went and got him from the Diamondbacks. But he was somebody for whom player development needed to happen. And he had this quote, you can't really simulate facing a pitcher in front of thousands of people and failing in front of a whole bunch of people. The idea of going from minor league baseball, which is you travel across the country, you get moved to affiliates, you climb the ladder that way, to a European soccer style, which is you play for the U21s, you play for the U23s, you play for, you're into the system really young and you develop at backfields. It's almost like the GCL and the AZL. You might travel a little bit more, like if you're a Tottenham player, I'm a Tottenham fan, you might go and travel and play the Southampton U21, something like that. For baseball, it would probably only be in Florida and Arizona and do what we do now, just playing on the backfields. That's not good for baseball because baseball itself is trying to grow. And the way you do that is you bring it across the country. You bring it to the Pioneer League. You bring it to the Appalachian League. There are 30 major league markets right now. There are so many more minor league markets that you want to get fans, you bring it to their front doorstep.
Yeah.
We talked to Josh Jackson a bunch about going to see the Portland Sea Dogs. Yeah, you could easily go to Boston, but that's a 3-hour trip. That's really difficult. Put it where people are. They aren't just in metropolitan areas, although a lot of minor league teams are as well. But that's a whole part of this argument that doesn't get put here. Another part that I think he tried to make at one point that the NBA, the NHL, the NFL, the other 3 big sports in America, guys get drafted, they get thrown into the elite league almost immediately. Usually, not always the case. It is the case with the NFL for sure. The NBA has the D League, or it could be the European style where you send them to Europe for a couple of years. The NHL has the AHL. It's not perfect, but baseball doesn't do that. Why doesn't baseball do that? We're seeing guys like Fernando Tatis Jr. jump right up from Double-A. Chris Paddock had limited experience. He's been doing pretty well this year. And then they use the examples of somebody like Casey Mize or Walker Buehler, and they talk to them about like, hey, we need to fail. We need bigger challenges. That's great. But Casey Mize and Walker Buehler came from big college programs.
Right.
They had their failures in front of big stadiums before getting drafted, and then you send them to Erie or Oklahoma City or Tulsa, where those guys have gone, and they do better because they've already been in those scenarios. So they sit around and think like, oh, why? I need a bigger challenge. That's great. What about some of these guys who get drafted out of high school? Yeah, the minor league success rate is fairly low, but we don't know what they're going to be until we put them in these scenarios. Putting them on the backfields in front of no fans, in front of no second decks, in front of no decks to begin with, isn't helping them develop into major league talent. Never mind just the entertainment factor, taking it out of people's backyards and that kind of thing, and how baseball itself needs minor league baseball to build up the popularity of the sport. There are players who need this. Mariano Rivera came into baseball, ended it as an elite closer. Originally was not that. He needed that development time to even become a major leaguer, and then famously, obviously, moved to the bullpen and developed a cutter and did all that kind of stuff. That stuff takes time. And limiting the amount of affiliates limits the amount of time for somebody like Mariano Rivera. Not just him. Ronald Acuna was a breakout prospect. Mike Piazza was famously a late round pick. Limiting affiliates and just saying like, hey, okay, we're only going to go with this select few, but we're going to pour in development dollars to that. It not only hurts players, but it just hurts teams and the chances that breakout guys can happen. We've seen it happen. It might be a small percentage. It might be 5 guys a year, but still, those 5 guys a year become superstars that drive the game, and we need that. So yeah, it might not seem like the game needs so many affiliates, and maybe we see a slight trimming, especially on the GCL side. Maybe teams don't need 2 GCL teams, or they don't need 2 DSL teams. Maybe we see a trimming there, but in terms of the general minor leagues, this is where you build the game, not only for players, like we said, but also fans. And I would hate to see that be lost in any type of manner.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a laughable concept, but it got people talking, and it's one of the big things. Also, go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, J.J. Cooper of Baseball America had a really good thread in which he talked about, some of the arguments that are put forth by it, and the proposal that, baseball back in the 1970s and 80s, when there were fewer teams, it was so much healthier with the minor leagues, blah, blah, blah. That was back in the day when minor league baseball, most minor league teams, as he put it, were just struggling to keep the lights on. And in this boom era of minor league baseball, the teams that have largely been added have been complex level teams, which add basically zero cost for the major league affiliates. So there is very little risk for them to do that. It's just a lot that minor league baseball is not going away. And yes, maybe there will be more of a trimming and a streamlining of things, but there were a lot of people who got, I think, kind of spooked by it. And minor league baseball is extraordinarily healthy, and 40 plus million people went through the gates this year, and it's going to be around for a good long time.
Yeah, that was the one funny thing about the story as well. As you mentioned before, the attendance numbers, it notes that in 2018, attendance went down a little bit. But then quickly after that story came out was that attendance bounced back this year. It was up more than 1 million. It was the biggest year-to-year growth since 2006 to 2007. in terms of the business of minor league baseball, that is very healthy, and that just kind of took that part of the argument right off it. And people are still coming to games. People are enjoying coming to games, as we hear from you guys all the time, which is great for not just minor leagues and all that, but the sport in general. I don't think this is the time to think about, hey, maybe we should start stripping some of that away.
Yeah, so sorry about it. That'll do it for this week's episode. 3 strikes on this week's episode of the Show Before the Show.
Speaking to the Show Before the Show, the minor league baseball podcast, after what's been a whirlwind week so far for him, is number 4 Mets prospect, Matthew Allan. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. Just kind of take us through this week, where you are right now. I know you got to go to Citi Field yesterday. We talked about it in a previous segment on the show that you helped lead Brooklyn to a New York Penn League title. What has this week been like for you?
No, I mean, it's been nothing short of just special and incredible. I'm still kind of coming off a high with the championship, and then getting the news that we get to go to Citi Field, and kind of coming from the GCL, I think it meant a little bit more as well, because I got the experience in the GCL to kind of talk and kind of hang out with a guy like Brandon Nimmo, and in Brooklyn, I'm fortunate enough to see like Robinson Cano and Jed Lowry, those guys. So I think it's kind of special seeing them in a big league ballpark and actually seeing them doing their craft and doing their thing. It's special when you've already had a one-on-one conversation with them. So I know that meant a lot. I saw Brandon, I saw Nimmo when I got to the field, and we talked, and so it was pretty surreal. But yeah, I'm just still coming off in high for the championship, especially for my first year, and no better place than in New York. And so yeah, it was nothing short of incredible.
And let's go through your Game 3 appearance there. You're going up against Lowell. It's a best-of-3 series, so it's winner take all. You're playing in Coney Island in Brooklyn, so not very far from Citi Field itself, obviously. You get the ball. You throw 3 perfect innings. What was that experience like? What were you thinking going into that game, knowing every pitch is a potential title decider?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I just wanted to do the best I can to put up zeros, whatever that meant. Just to when I came in, it was I believe it was 2-2, and so just going in, I kind of looked at the scouting reports, looked at the guys that they had, and just the biggest thing that I kind of learned from being there is just learn to trust my stuff. And so going in, I just want to put up zeros for my team and just to keep the game going, and as they say, pass the torch, pass it to the next guy. And so, I was really happy because I actually got to go out for a 3rd inning. I've been kind of capped at 2 innings, but, I had a low pitch count. And so, Matos was like, hey, want to go out for a 3rd inning? I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so, it was awesome. And I was, just really happy that, I could, pass the torch and just do the best I can to help my team win, because we were fighting, from the beginning, and, Lowell's a good team. That's why they were in that situation. And so, I was just really happy that we ended up pulling out the win. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of experiences are you pulling on in a moment like that? Because you just turned 18, back in April, and you're already pitching for a professional championship. It's a low level, but still you're giving Brooklyn its first outright championship. What were you thinking about, like leaning on experience-wise, or was it just knowing the scouting reports of the Lowell players? I mean, how were you kind of mentally able to get in there?
Mentally, I think the biggest thing for me was, Garrison Bryant. He was a real contributing factor. I think to having success that night and the outing before, and just honestly being in Brooklyn, he kind of just taught me a lot of trusting your stuff. You just got to trust your stuff. You got to act like you belong here. You got to know that you belong here. You can't feel like an outcast. You can't feel like, oh, these guys are older than me. They went to SEC schools, Kentucky, this, that, and the other. You can't think like that. You got to all think, look, we're all professionals, and I belong in this situation. I belong on this team. And, honestly, I think after my first outing, I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about the league. I learned a lot just about pitching and myself, strengths and weaknesses. And, it's definitely a different animal coming from the GCL, but I learned a lot from my first outing, and that definitely helped build confidence in, for my next 2 outings, and especially in that 3-inning stint. I just told myself, you got to trust your stuff, even if you're behind in the count. 2-0 changeups, 2-1 curveballs, that kind of, you got to know you're going to hit your spot. You can't think where this guy went, what this guy did, all this guy's attributes. You just got to, believe in yourself and have that, just inner confidence that you're going to be successful. So that's kind of how I approached it.
And just to give people a background on that, your first outing, you gave up 2 runs on 5 hits in the first 2 innings. Then you come in for the postseason, your first postseason appearance, 2 hitless innings, and then the next one, 3 perfect innings. So it seems like you got over the hump there. But just going back to that jump from the GCL, the rest of the season got canceled early. There were no playoffs, anything like that. And then the Mets come to you and say, hey, we're going to send you up to Brooklyn, not even to Kingsport. We're going to skip you right to Class A short season. What was that conversation like, and what instructions did they give you about jumping you straight into an affiliate like that?
It was pretty surreal. I was really excited. I kind of, I didn't honestly know at first. It was pretty last minute, but Davi, the head coach in the GCL, the manager, was just, we were in the hotel, and then he was kind of explaining, what's going to happen, the hurricane, we're leaving, season's over, that kind of thing. Pulled me to the side and just said, hey, look, if Kingsport wins tonight, you're going to Kingsport. If Kingsport loses, you're going to go to Brooklyn. And I was like, Brooklyn? Wow. All right, let's do this. Kingsport ended up losing. And so, I was like, all right, we're going to go to Brooklyn. This is actually happening. And, I think basically the only, instructions, I didn't really have any instructions. It was just, you're going to go to Aberdeen. They were playing the Ironbirds, the Orioles affiliate. I showed up there and, got dressed and kind of talked to a couple of the guys, but still, it was a little different, obviously, because I pulled up maybe an hour before the game. And so I still wanted to play catch and kind of go through my normal routine, because they told me I was pitching on Saturday. I got there on Thursday, and they're like, hey, you got 2 innings on Saturday at home. And they said, it's going to be busy. It's going to be packed. And I was like, oh, lovely. And so it was pretty surreal walking into an actual stadium. Like, even though it was before the game, there were still a decent amount of fans there, and just being around the guys. And also I think it was pretty huge that Brett Beatty, he was also promoted, and so him and I, we basically did everything together. We got breakfast together every morning. We had the locker room conversation, the dugout conversation, that kind of thing. I think him and I, we kind of just fed off of each other, the experiences that we're seeing, because he's obviously an incredible hitter. And so I want to learn as much as I can for what he's seeing. And, we kind of just talk back and forth about, this, that, about hitting, pitching, all that kind of stuff. And so I think all of that all together kind of prepared me for my first outing. And then throwing that, first outing, it was definitely a little frustrating because, I felt in certain counts I made good pitches and there was soft contact, but that's just part of the game. You just got to kind of deal with that, and you got to deal with the frustrations that come with it. And so I was okay with that. But the biggest thing for me was I really learned from it. I learned just like I said, about the league, about the hitters, the aggressiveness, and just the kind of, these, obviously they're smarter hitters. As you get better and better, you can't make as many mistakes. And so that, that was definitely something that I saw and right from the get-go, my first outing, that the mistakes, they're just going to keep getting hit harder and farther and all that kind of thing. And so trying to minimize that, is the kind of the biggest thing that I figured out, and just trusting my stuff, hitting my spots, trusting my catcher, all those kind of things.
And between these last 2 weeks, I think you only pitched at MCU Park, so you got to know what that place is like pretty well, pitching deep in Brooklyn on Coney Island. You go to Citi Field yesterday, get to be feted by the Mets as a title winner. What has kind of been your New York City experience so far? Because being drafted by the Mets, that is your dream to make a home here and live here. So what has it been like, just these whirlwind 2 weeks of being in New York City like this?
No, for sure. I mean, it was a whirlwind, but it was surreal. It was awesome. And, when I got drafted and went to Citi Field, I got to watch DeGrom versus Soroka, and that was incredible. And it was also the 60th anniversary weekend, and so it was packed. And just being there for the close moments and hearing the crowd and all that kind of stuff, it got me really excited. It's that kind of taste that they tell you. It's that taste that you feel like, all right, we want to show you where you want to be, but you got to work hard for it, obviously. And so then being in Brooklyn, experiencing what it's like to the routine is different in Brooklyn and in a short season and even in a full season, as it's different than in the GCL. In the GCL you're up 6, 7 in the morning, practice, game, that kind of thing. And going from that, learning all that I can learn there, feeding off of everybody that I can there, and then kind of coming to Brooklyn. It's a bit different. You're more kind of individualized. You are a little bit more on your own, and it's even different that you don't have to wake up as early. I kind of had to tool with that a little bit, having to get breakfast in the morning, because if the van doesn't come till 2:00, that's different. I'm used to leaving and going at 7 a.m. in the GCL, but just pitching in Brooklyn and in the nights that I pitched, and I was fortunate enough that each game was important. It was a playoff game, or it was busy, that kind of thing. And so I got to taste that environment, taste the crowd, taste the energy, all that kind of thing. And then just going back to City and being able to see it again firsthand, feel it. I was outside, so each time, Matt struck a guy out, or he got out of a bases loaded jam, you could just feel that energy. And so it's like, yeah, this is definitely this is where I want to be.
And let's talk about you as a pitcher and your adjustment to the pros. For people who are unaware of your game, you throw a pretty good fastball hitting the high 90s at times, and you got a plus curveball and a plus change, and with some good control. But what do you feel like allowed you to make the transition, at least stuff-wise, pretty well this summer between the GCL and Brooklyn?
Definitely getting ahead of hitters. Getting ahead of hitters just builds that confidence. When you get ahead of hitters, you don't, you feel the need, you feel like the phrase you can make a mistake is, I don't love that phrase, but when you're behind, and you definitely, in the GCL, they preach, so you got to get ahead of hitters, And that was, I think, key for me in Brooklyn, was getting ahead of hitters, because then that allowed me to work the corners, that allowed me to expand the zone for the hitter, that allowed me to do all that. And so I think, that, and just, like I said, just feeling like, I belong there, and trusting my stuff, really trusting that a 2-0 changeup, that I can execute that I don't have to baby it, that I can, throw it as if I was going to do it as a punch out, or something like that. But definitely in the GCL, it was really helpful because, in high school, you can make more mistakes. You can leave the ball over the middle of the plate more. You can get behind the count more and still strike the guy out. When you get to the GCL, it's a little harder. The hitters are a little better. When you get to Brooklyn, the hitters are a little better. And, as you keep going up, the less mistakes you can make, and the more consistent you need to be. And so I think kind of already understanding that, but definitely the foundation started in the GCL of, the Ariel Prieto preaching first pitch strikes, being able to, execute in the bullpen, all that kind of stuff, taking all your throws serious, taking your bullpen serious, not just doing it to go through the motions. That definitely kind of was the building blocks to having, success in Brooklyn, facing better hitters and feeling confident about it. I belong there.
And so we talked a little bit about your pro career so far. Let's talk about what got you there. You were one of the most interesting draft stories going into the draft this year. Let's step even further back a little bit, because I don't think you were necessarily a big name on the board before you were a senior. Some places write out that you weren't a big name at summer showcases and stuff like that. When did you feel like you were a high round pick and that you were getting more attention?
I think for me, school was always a school, and it still is, it's still very important to my family and I, and it was always a priority for me that, education is just, everybody's gone to school in my family. And so being the first not to go to college is definitely a different for my family and I. But I think, over the off season, I took a step of, I didn't actually go to a real school. I did Florida virtual school. That kind of expanded my schedule. That kind of taught me, honestly, a lot of stuff about time management, doing things on your own, not having, teachers down your throat, got to do this, got to do that. That kind of taught me a lot. And then also gave me time to focus on my craft for baseball workouts. I hit the off season really hard. I spent a lot of time focusing on pitching, focusing on the movements that I needed to do to be successful and stay healthy. I think early spring, I was, my velocity was up. I still had good control of my pitches. I was throwing for strikes, that kind of thing. And, I think at that point I was thinking, this is really a possibility. But, for me, I was just wanted to stay less level-headed as I could and understand that anything could happen. And honestly, it did happen, the freak scenario, all that kind of stuff. But, I felt like I was really well prepared for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you mentioned education and how important that was to your family and to you, and everybody pretty well knew that you had a strong commitment to the University of Florida and it was going to take something to get away from there. Was that something you were communicating to teams? I mean, how does that process work where everybody knows that, hey, he's probably going to college, so we should probably stay away unless we can really talk him into it?
When you meet with teams, they try to get a feel for you. They try to get a feel for, the environment that you live in, the environment you surround yourself with, the people you're around, the things you like to do. And, I think for them, understanding that I do virtual school and I take it really serious. And, I like to finish my classes early. I like to get it all done, kind of hearing that and then hearing, like at Florida, I was planning on studying applied kinesiology and physiology. I feel like that's really intriguing, especially understanding pitching and how the body moves. And so I think them kind of understanding that. And then, like I said, my parents, both went to school. My dad's got guy's master's in finance, and, I think them kind of hearing that and just being around my family, they understood that education was a big thing and meant a lot. So.
And at what point did you know the Mets were interested in potentially taking you anywhere, not just the third round, but anywhere on the board and trying to talk you out of that UF commitment?
I saw John Updike at a lot of my games, and I saw a couple, different kind of higher up scouts at, different, couple of my games. And, I think at that point I was thinking, they're definitely a contender. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So at what point for draft day, that first round comes and people gather around and the first round, second round is the same night. Were you watching it all, expecting to hear your name? Were you waiting until day two? I mean, what was your draft day experience like?
It was different. Like I said, I was definitely well prepared. Boris, they prepared me really well to understand that anything could happen, and you got to be prepared for that. That any freak scenario could happen. You very well need to be ready to go to college and feel proud about that and accept that and really feel confident about it. And so I was fully prepared going into that night, knowing that I could go out, go to the University of Florida, and I was very happy with that. It was a weird night. It was definitely a weird night. Not the whole day kind of hearing chatter about this, that, and the other, and, kind of hearing all the buzz. That's definitely a big thing is, I was a sucker for the buzz and social media and that kind of thing. And, kind of hearing, should go this route, should go this, take this pick. Not having it happen definitely was frustrating, but I think that's kind of the foundation that I want to take and run with that, for, if I could have a story for like anybody or tell any, kid growing up or anything like that, if they want to play baseball, I think I could be a good person to talk to about that. Cause, going into that night, I for sure thought that, first round was a possibility, top whatever picks. And I was like, that definitely could happen, but, it didn't happen. And it was, frustrating, but, kind of all worked out in the end. So.
Yeah, and when the Mets do call your name in the third round, it's pretty well accepted now that anybody taking the top 10 rounds is going to sign. Obviously, there are some exceptions to that. But did you pretty well know that when they called your name that you were going to sign, or did you think the signing process was still going to be long and a long process itself?
No, the sign process was still going to be long. I was waiting for every 4 through 10 to sign. I was waiting for Brett to sign and for Josh Wolf to sign, and then for rounds 4 through 10, I was waiting for those picks to sign. So I think it took about a month for the whole thing to unfold and for my first day in the GCL. But it was definitely a long process. But I think it was good because I got to spend a little bit more time at home, kind of be with family, do that kind of thing, and then also. I think it really just, kept me hungry and wanted me to, I really wanted to go out and play. And, every day I was like, I wish I could be there. I wish I could, be playing and pitching, that kind of thing. And so I think once I got there, I was really well prepared because I've been waiting.
And what was your welcome to the pros moment starting out in the GCL? You talked a little bit about that experience, but that first moment where you realized, whoa, this is my job. And this is something as a pitcher, you're going to do it every 5th or 6th day, but every day you get to come to the baseball field. What was that welcome moment for you?
It was, it was awesome. It's everything I've ever wanted to do in life. And I think I really understood that after probably the first week, realizing that you're coming to the park every day and you're coming to work, it's hot, you're going to be tired, all those things that, everybody could complain about and say they don't like, those were all reasons why I enjoyed it. And I felt, I was prepared for it, but, I think I realized at that point that this is my job and I got to treat it like my job. I can't take it as, I'm just going to take this day off because I don't feel like it, or I'm just going to, do this because I don't feel like it. That's, that, and at least in my book, it's not acceptable. And, wanting to show up every day to the field with a game plan and, wanting to get better and wanting to learn and that kind of thing. So I think, kind of being at the games every day, doing, throwing every day, conditioning every day, lifting, doing all that kind of thing, understanding this is, the foundation, and this is a start of a new path and career. So.
And when you go into this off season, because this is the first time you've ever had an off season, normally you're taking your classes now and working on other things, but now you're working towards spring again. What are you going to learn from this season in terms of a foundation and put it into your off season work to become maybe a little bit more of a complete pitcher by the time you report to your first spring training here in a couple months?
Definitely, I learned a lot about myself and strengths and weaknesses. Learned a lot about minor league baseball and the importance of hitting your spots, importance of throwing strikes, importance of trusting your stuff, and having quality stuff and that kind of thing. I think also, learning a lot about my body. I like to say that I know my body pretty well. I know my arm pretty well. I know, what works best for me for the recovery, recovery rate and, that kind of thing, what, necessarily doesn't work for me. But I think this, being and playing every day and lifting and doing all those things on a weekly basis and, being hot and, all those kind of things, I think I learned a lot about what it's going to be like next season because, the goal is to hopefully make a full season team. And so just learning a lot about my body and, what it takes to be ready and to not be overly prepared so that I'm tired, by the end of spring training, but not prepared enough that, when I show up, I'm, not ready to execute and, that kind of thing.
And so, Matt, we'll end on this one. You were born in California, according to your bio on your MILB.com page. You are from Florida. What did you know about the Mets fan base, and what have you learned about the organization and just everything around it here now that you're officially a New York Met?
I think originally, because I moved when I was pretty young, so originally I didn't know that much. When I started to do more research, I knew that I knew the facility was in Florida. I started to learn more about the affiliates and what that actually meant. I knew that the fans, just being a New York fan base, I knew that they were passionate about their baseball, but I think I firsthand experienced that when I went to City. And so I think I knew that from the beginning, but I think I fully started to grasp it once I got there and I was in the environment. I saw something by Pete Alonso and it said, it's easy to be a Yankee fan. And I think that speaks, volumes for the Mets because, obviously they have a really good team and, you talk to any of them, they've had some frustrating moments. I've talked to Nemo about it. It's had some frustrating moments, but, it's easy to be a Yankee fan, but, they stay true to themselves, the fans, and they stay true to the Mets organization. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of what I've learned.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Mets fans are happy to have you part of the organization, and obviously off on the right foot here with the New York Penn League Championship with the Brooklyn Cyclones. Matt Allan,
for sure.
Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time, and enjoy the start of the offseason, and good luck the rest of the way wherever it takes you in the Mets system.
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And joining us back as always on the Minor League Baseball podcast, the show before the show this week, is Ben Hill. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, back as always.
Back as always. I don't know. I'm not as good as transitions as Tyler is. But we're here this week to talk about Hagerstown. We talked a little bit about your trips in the past when you went to Potomac and Hagerstown. Now you've got two stories up on the Hagerstown Suns. We'll start on this on-the-road story. You're talking about the team's team spirit, the Suns fan club, how they kind of work with players and celebrate team history, including the history as the Hagerstown Packets. What can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, well, I finished my 2019 on-the-road season, my 2019 travel campaign in Potomac and Hagerstown at the very end of the season. We talked about Potomac and the Fitz and how that team is moving to Fredericksburg. But after I went to the Fitz, I went to Hagerstown. Municipal Stadium, hadn't been there for, I believe, 8 years, built in 1930. So obviously, operationally, it's a pretty difficult place to operate out of for a 2019 Class A South Atlantic team. They're a Washington Nationals affiliate. And so when I'm at ballparks like that, where there's a lot of history and where attendance might be struggling and where operationally it's difficult because you're in such an old ballpark, I think in that there's that famous Mr. Rogers quote that always gets paraphrased to some extent, but look for the helpers. And when something is bad, when something bad is going on, look for the helpers. And I feel like when you're in an old minor league stadium, it's like look for the real fans. Because in places where a lot of people write off and say, "Oh, why would you go to that old dump?" Of course, you go to an old dump. It's a historic ballpark built in 1930, and you're always going to find, I think, some of the most endearing fans because they're the people who really commit to the game of baseball and to that team, not just there's a concourse and I can walk around and my kids can run on the berm and there's a big scoreboard. I'm not against those things. But I think there's something to be said for the fan culture that exists in these old ballparks where a lot of tenets of the modern day minor league experience are not there. So the Hagerstown Suns have a fan club. The Hagerstown Suns fan club. That's what it's called.
Very simple and to the point.
Yeah, so I talked to the president of the fan club, a woman named Judy Baker, a retired 5th and 6th grade teacher. And, she just telling me about some of the things that teams do. And it's, again, like to me, very endearing and grassroots. Throughout the season, they... when players break bats during games, they'll collect the bats, glue them back together, have the player who broke the bat, whose bat it was, sign it, and then they'll have bat raffles and bat auctions. And then, the modest money they get from that goes to things like, providing meals for the players. Judy said that, throughout the off season, she'll look for sales on men's warm weather clothes, and she will collect clothes specifically for the Hispanic players because when they get to Hagerstown in early April, coming themselves, young guys who might not have much experience in the United States at all, might not have experience with living in a place like, Southern Maryland in April and May when it can still be chilly and it can even snow in April. So that kind of thing, so, raffling off broken game-used bats to buy things such as warm weather clothes for the Hispanic players. I like that kind of grassroots thing that goes on in these small market clubs. And one of the things that the fan club does every year is they sponsor a theme jersey that the Suns wear throughout the year, and it might be anniversary related in terms of the Suns franchise itself or how long they've had an affiliate or celebrating team history. And the fan club, they fund these jerseys by it's like a self-perpetuating thing. At the end of the season, they will auction off that year's fan club jerseys, and then the proceeds fund the next year's fan club jerseys. And this year's fan club jerseys, they were red, red, white, and blue H over a red base. But they commemorated, and they had a patch on the sleeves to commemorate this, the Hagerstown Packets, which I thought was a cool bit of history, a Piedmont League team from 1954 to 1955. The name was a reference to the C-82 Packet military transport plane, which was manufactured in Hagerstown by the Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation, which was the city's largest employer at the time. So just the things you learn when you visit minor league baseball stadiums. That Hagerstown once manufactured military transport team planes, and one of the planes was called nicknamed the Packet, and there was a minor league team called the Packets. And here we are in the year 2019 with the fan club sponsoring jerseys, celebrating those 1954, 1955 Packets. And I found this, I keep using the word endearing, but I did find Hagerstown to be quite endearing. At the end of the game that I was at on Sunday or Saturday of Labor Day weekend, they auctioned off the jerseys on the field. And, usually there might be a silent jersey auction in-game. A lot of teams are now, taking it to another level with the Live Source app, so you can bid on jerseys, away from the ballpark. In Hagerstown, again, a pretty grassroots operation. The players, who probably grumbled in the clubhouse before they came back out, literally just stood on the field as these jerseys were auctioned off individually by the team's PA announcer. And the fans sat on the bleachers down the first base side and participated in a live auction for these jerseys. It was a real small-town moment, and there you have it.
And they raised $3,900 by doing that.
Yeah, $3,900, and that'll go towards next year's theme jersey.
Yeah, that's no small amount. Sticking in Hagerstown, you also have a story that went up today as of we're recording this on Thursday, so people can find it on the site then. On Tony DeBurra.
Tony DeBurra, yep.
Yeah, Suns co-owner, but he does so many other things than just be part of the ownership group. What are some of those things he brings to the Suns?
An interesting guy. This was when I was at Hagerstown on a Saturday night, and I probably talked about the press box, but it's a spiral staircase, which I later learned was manufactured in Hagerstown, and there's only like one of two spiral staircase companies in the U.S. are in Hagerstown. That's what I was told. We'll have to look into that. Yeah. But anyway,
if you know of a third, email us at podcast@mlb.com.
Please, and if you have any just knowledge of spiral staircases in general, I'd love to know. So I was going up the kind of treacherous but very enjoyable spiral staircase to get to the rooftop press box, and a man is coming down, so I kind of have to go back down to make way for him, and he's like, "Hey, are you Ben?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, yeah, I heard you were coming. I'm Tony. I'm the team's co-owner." And I'm just like, saying hi, just kind of shooting the breeze for a minute or two. And then he starts saying like, "Well, I'm a co-owner, but, people around here know me as Shag, because what I do is I shag balls during batting practice, and I've been doing that, for years." And I'm like, "Okay, you want to just like actually do an interview here? Because I'm always looking for those kind of stories." So a really interesting guy, born in Hagerstown, and then his family moved to El Salvador when he was a child in the 60s, because his father was an entrepreneur. His family had a lot of entrepreneurial efforts out in El Salvador during his childhood, including opening the first overseas Hardee's location. But he was a big baseball fan in El Salvador, played on the 18 and under national team, went to college went back to the U.S. to attend college, played college ball there. Was very involved in engineering and computer science, eventually returned to Hagerstown to join his family's businesses in Hagerstown, because they too came back from El Salvador once the political situation became untenable to running things like the first overseas Hardee's, I presume. So really interesting guy. And he said, so he got to know Kurt Landis, who was then the Suns general manager, and who for years he's been the only general manager, team president the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs have ever had. But Kurt Landis came to Lehigh Valley from the Suns, from Hagerstown. And so he and Tony DeBurra knew each other in the early 21st century in Hagerstown, through the Rotary Club and community-minded things. And Tony one day is talking to Chris and says, or to Kurt, and he says, I had a dream last night that I was shagging balls at Municipal Stadium for the Suns, and I realized that was the key to my happiness. So Kurt Landis, the GM at the time, hired him to be the team's shagger. Literally hired him because he said, "I don't know if we can do this in a volunteer capacity because there might be liability issues." So, he's a local businessman, interesting background. Now he's the Hagerstown Suns shagger. And then some years pass, and Mandalay Baseball is looking to sell the Suns, and he ends up, he's a minority owner. A man named Bruce Quinn is the majority owner, but he helped put together the group that bought the Suns from Mandalay Baseball. So now he's the team shagger / co-owner. And then as we're talking further, he mentions the fact that he's really into making minor league baseball schedules, and he does so for Johns Hopkins. And I'm like, wait a second, I did a whole story on you and the fact that you work with Johns Hopkins students to make, optimize supercomputer generated schedules. And so this is the same guy. So anyway, my story is about Tony DeBurra, Hagerstown by way of El Salvador, long-time baseball fan, Hagerstown Suns co-owner and on-field shagger for the last 16 years, and also an executive director at Johns Hopkins Computer Science Security Institute, something along those lines, who makes, along with his students and along with computer science and applied mathematics faculty members at Johns Hopkins, makes many of the minor league schedules that affect all of our lives in one way or another, through combinatorial optimization, I believe it's called. But, so this is just one of those things. I ran into a dude on a spiral staircase, and then I got this story out of it. So here we are. And that does it for my, kind of official on-the-road features of 2019. Still got some designated eater stuff and a lot of kind of odds and ends that I'll sprinkle through, throughout the month of October. So I'm not totally done, but I'm officially done now with the recurring features, on-the-road features. And, hey, it's the off season. And when we talk next week, all the games will have all concluded. Playoffs, AAA National Championship. Next week, it'll truly be the off season. But then I'm going to El Paso for the Innovator Summit. Never ends. Industry events. Okay.
And I think everybody just got kind of a look behind the curtain of what the Ben's Biz process is when you're at a stadium and how you get your interviews and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
just hang out at spiral staircases. That's it.
It really does. There might not always be a spiral staircase. I wish there was. But it really, people are always like, oh, where are you sitting? Or I'll meet up with you later at your seats. And I'm like, bro, I'm never sitting. I might not be moving very fast. In fact, I have a reputation within this very office for walking very slowly around the office. But I think that helps me get a lot of the stories I've gotten is just slowly walking around. And I've been doing it long enough. I'm certainly not a celebrity, although some of our coworkers would disagree that they believe I have celebrity status. But I've been doing this long enough that people do know me or recognize me within the minor league baseball world. And so I feel if I keep moving and keep staying active, I might run into something or someone might recognize me and start talking, and you just never know where things lead.
And one more thing we want to touch on with you, Ben, while you're here. You obviously cover minor league business more than probably anybody in the business. We talked a little bit about this in the last segment with Tyler, but minor league baseball released its attendance figures for the 2019 season. Attendance went up by more than 1 million fans. The increase was 2.6% over 2018. That's one of the biggest growths since 2006 to 2007. What do you think drove this, and how do you look at the attendance figures on the whole for 2019?
Well, obviously, it's a great thing for the industry anytime there's an attendance increase, especially because it's occurring within this larger landscape of most professional sports leagues attendance, having plateaued and starting to go down. So it's great to see minor league baseball as an outlier there. I think I'm going to write a story about this for next week, pinpointing what to me is obviously the largest factor. Because when you look at attendance, especially in something like minor league baseball with 160 teams, you can go down myriad rabbit holes about the reasons why, from weather to, promotional initiatives nationwide, such as Copa and the Pride Nights, and on and on and on and on. But I think if you really want to break it down and get to what is, to me, clearly the main reason that attendance went up 2.6%, a little over 1 million fans total, is that there were 3 new ballparks in 2019, and then there were 2 teams playing at different levels than they had the year before, and that would be San Antonio playing at AAA, replacing Colorado Springs, and then Colorado Springs in the Pioneer League, replacing Helena. So the 3 new ballparks, Vegas, Fayetteville, and Amarillo, as well as San Antonio in AAA and Colorado Springs in the Pioneer League, those 5 ballparks, or those 5 teams, had a cumulative 800,000 plus growth from their previous year, or the franchise they had been the previous year. So 5 teams accounted for over 800,000 in the increase. Most dramatically, Las Vegas, who didn't go anywhere, but they went from Cashman Field drawing about 330,000 to Las Vegas Ballpark drawing 650,000. So when you're looking at approximately 1 million increase, and then even one team was responsible for roughly 1/3 of that, it just speaks to new ballparks and and then in other cases teams playing at different levels that are perhaps more suitable to their market and ballpark situation or what have you. that really is the fundamental driver for an attendance increase. And I think the good news for that, so obviously the industry needs to find ways to keep increasing when, there might not be as many new ballparks, and, teams that aren't moving to new ballparks obviously need to find ways to maintain and increase. But I think when you look industry-wide at the biggest drivers, it absolutely has to do with new ballparks and shiftings in the landscape such as that. And I think we're well positioned for 2020 because we have Mobile, not drawing well, being replaced by Rocket City, who are coming out, I'm sure, going to come on like gangbusters. We have Fredericksburg replacing Potomac and the Fitz. We have a new ballpark in Kannapolis, and and the old ballpark in Kannapolis had not been drawing well. And we have a new ballpark in Wichita replacing New Orleans, which had not been drawing well on the AAA level. So I think it's well positioned to grow on that level. And then I think the real challenge for the industry is growing beyond those obvious areas of growth, through new ballparks. It's the more micro level growth that I think every team needs to be focused on, and keep things going. We're up over the 40 million mark. Minor league baseball is always over the 40 million mark. Be great to say, can we get to 43 million? Can it get to 45 million? Those would be truly significant. 2008 is still the all-time record for minor league baseball attendance, and I cannot remember exactly what it was, but let's bring it back to those 2008 levels and then beyond. And then, I think eventually it should be about 1 billion.
That set our sights real high. Well, let's just get the official number out there, because I don't think I said it the first time through. 41,504,077 fans passed through minor league gates this season. Like we said, it's big growth over 2018. We can kind of take this as a base level now that Vegas has the new stadium. There's a first-year excitement that goes with that, but all these other ballparks that you mentioned that are going to be added as well for next year. It seems like there's even further growth possibilities beyond this. So excited for 2020. We'll talk about that more down the line. But for the last in-season, really, podcast of the year, thanks for joining us, Ben.
Hey, it's been great to be here. Great to be always back. And it's going to be great to be back in the offseason, just next week.
Final segment on this week's episode of the Show Before the Show. Sam, what's coming up on MILB TV?
Yeah, so we don't have much MILB TV left, obviously, but like we've been saying the last couple weeks, tune into any finals you can get. Minor league baseball is finite in terms of how many games we have left in the 2019 season, but especially if you have a MILB TV subscription, tune in next Tuesday for the AAA National Championship. Like we said, right now it's looking like it's going to be Columbus and Sacramento. I'm not going to doubt the Durham Bulls. Potentially they could be back there for a third straight year. We'll have to see. But that game will be played in Memphis. That's Tuesday at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Whatever your time zone is, adjust appropriately. The game will be in Memphis. Our Kelsey Hennigan will be there. We're hoping she's going to provide a podcast interview with somebody who is at the AAA National Championship. So tune into this podcast next week to hear more about that. And we'll probably have Kelsey on the show to explain her experience and what she saw in Memphis. But tune in for that game when you get the chance, because that is the last MILB TV game on the schedule for 2019.
Insanity. And that'll do it for this week's episode of the Show Before the Show. He is Sam Dykstra. I'm Tyler Maun. We'll talk to you next week.